Mr. President, just about a month ago, I was on the floor. Senator Durbin from Illinois was here. We were on the floor at that time to ask for unanimous consent to pass legislation to fix a technical issue with the VOCA deposit. As colleagues will remember, VOCA is designed to help sustain the Crime Victims Fund Act, or that's the legislation that we had introduced at that time. And just to refresh memories, I'd like to reiterate why this fix to the Victims Fund is so essential. Effectively, what we're talking about here is stability, sustainability, and really credit certainty. I had an opportunity in late June to host a roundtable with members from the victims' services groups from around the state. We were focused on the impact of the VOCA deposit issue specific to Alaska and what it meant for those who provide for the services for victims, whether these are the child advocacy centers, whether these are the domestic violence shelters and the centers, abused women networks. But I was really blown away, Mr. President, by the testimony from so many in these organizations. They were facing a 36% cut to their VOCA funds in just this past fiscal year. And so when you think about what the impact of cuts at 36% mean to any organization, it is obviously very, very limiting. But for some of these organizations, we're talking about a quarter of their budget, a quarter of their annual budget could be lost just like that. And what they shared with me was that this was everything for them. This was the difference of being able to answer the phone from somebody who has been abused, is in an awful, tragic situation, doesn't know where to go, and they phone that number, and there's nobody to take that call, nobody to respond, nobody to save those lines. It is a matter of not just having the individual there to answer the phone, but again, when we think about the types of services that are provided by these victim service organizations, they are there for truly the most vulnerable at an exceptionally vulnerable moment in their lives. I was able to hear from those who were gathered at this roundtable to hear firsthand on the increases in victimization that we've seen in my home state of Alaska during this past year as we've seen this impact from COVID. But the impacts of this increase on our providers has really been astounding. Alaska Cares, for example, saw a 173% increase in children hospitalized in the pediatric ICU for serious physical abuse and fatal neglect. Think about that. They had a 173% increase in these kids that are being hospitalized. And what they said, they were seeing significant brain trauma, significant brain injury. I heard about unprecedented increases that we're seeing in child torture, which our child advocacy centers are witnessing firsthand. Really, when you think about that, it just has to just haunt you to the core. The Alaska chapter of Volunteers of America, who receives VOCA funds to provide at-risk youth and children with vital mental health services, they shared a story, introduced me to Alice. Alice is a teen who experienced numerous traumatic events in her young life, including child sexual assault and neglect. And by receiving services through VOCA, she's pulling her life together. She's learning coping skills, learning to make those positive choices. And so when we think about the role that these victim services, these providers who, again, are there for truly the most vulnerable at the most vulnerable times that they may face, it should make us want to do everything that we can to ensure that they have the resources available for them. Mr. President, the longer that Congress delays this inevitable fix, the larger cuts victim services in Alaska and in every state in our nation are going to face. I think we all recognize that this has been a difficult time, but for those who are trying to serve victims through a global pandemic, it's really been so much harder. It's been 10 times harder. Our providers are exhausted, they're burned out, and now they're faced with massive cuts. Now, my colleague from Pennsylvania has some legitimate budget concerns that he hopes to address through an amendment that we will take up later today. His concerns with changes in mandatory spending are valid, and I respect that. But this VOCA Fix legislation is not the mechanism to address these concerns. I fear that if his amendment should pass, it will delay and perhaps derail this much-needed fix. We're hearing from victims, we're hearing from survivors, we're hearing from victim service organizations. They're asking us, they're begging us for a fix now to the VOCA deposit. I'm not hearing too many of them ask for chimp reform. The use of chimps is controversial. Our legislation, which would fix the VOCA deposit, is not. Mr. President, we cannot fail the many who dedicate their lives to serving victims and survivors. There was an Alaska organization at the VOCA Roundtable who said it very neatly. She said, "It is a representation of our values as a society, how we help those who are most vulnerable." And Mr. President, we have the ability today to do what's right, so I would urge my colleagues to vote aye on the VOCA Fix Act. And with that, I yield the floor.